Hi everyone, Tom here from NovaCode. So earlier today I had somebody give me a little poke on the comments section saying they wanted to see part 3 of our TypeScript tutorial series come out ASAP. And I want to thank that guy because you gave me a little bit of a boot in the butt and a fire underneath to get going here with these videos again. So I really appreciate you hitting me up on the comments section and getting back to me. So without further ado, let's get into part 3 of our TypeScript tutorial series and how to build out our API. So in this video, we're going to cover how to create a simple class file that will group our routing into clusters. And what I mean by this is like we're going to be working with our user collection, we're going to be working with a customer collection, and we're going to want different endpoints for working with these two things. When this happens, we pretty much want to group these things into a single place to make it a little easier for maintenance purposes. And I'm going to show you what to do whenever you wind up in a situation where you have to make cross calls. In other words, you have a object that's depending on another API object, and you need to talk to that other API object. There's ways of handling that internally, and I can show you that a little later on. We're also going to expose our route on our API. And this is just going to be a basic test route that we're just going to run a get call and show that we can get some text from our server. And then finally, we're going to begin adding some realistic code to our backend that you can take a look at. And this is going to be stuff that you're really going to be doing in the real world. So in order to get moving with this video, you're going to need a few things. You're going to need a copy of NPM. You're going to need Node. You're also going to need MongoDB and Compass. You'll also need your favorite IDE. In our case, we'll be using WebStorm. You'll need a copy of Postman, and you're going to need up to the part 2 of our TypeScript tutorial series. And if you don't have that code, I'll show you where to get it in our repo in a little bit. But for MongoDB and Compass, I'm assuming that if you need that code, you're probably going to need MongoDB and Compass as well. Go ahead and head on over to part 2 of our video series. In the very beginning, I show you where to go get those applications and how to get them onto your PC and how to work with them and configure them. So go ahead and break on over to that video real quick and get yourself set up. For those of us who are all caught up, let's head on over to pick up our copy of Postman. So you can go to www.getpostman.com and download the app. It's a really simple installation, and we're going to be using this a little later on to test out our API. As far as getting the code base, you can go to github.com/NovaCodeLLC. You can head to our TypeScript Express API repository, go to branch, make sure that part 2 of the tutorial series is selected, and then just go ahead and clone the repo. It's really easy to do. I've made some updates and I fixed some problems with the code on there so that you shouldn't run into issues. And I'll try to point those out for our users who have been following along, and we'll address those first once we get the RxJS installed to our PC. So let's go ahead and get some RxJS on our PC. So let's do npm i-save RxJS. And I believe I already have it in my package. Yeah, so I don't need to do this, but go ahead and run that. And while that's running, for those of you who haven't paid attention in the previous video or may not have noticed, make sure your server TS file resides underneath your SRC folder. Also, go to your bin and change your www file, line number 9, to be /server/server. Once you've done that, head over to your package.json file and go to your scripts. And in your start script, you're going to see this node, and yours will most likely say ./bin/www. Change that to be ./dist/bin/www. This is going to prevent some problems later on. You can get all of this if you just pull the repo, and it will update your code base to the latest version. Cool. If you are just pulling this project for the first time, make sure you run an npm i to get all of our dependency updates. I think that's everything. And let's go ahead and start writing some code. So let me go ahead and remove our side browser here, and there we go. All right, let's paste some code in. So you're going to want to create this API folder and then add a TypeScript file called user API. Inside of there, I'm going to paste a little bit of code. And I'm going to get this little red squiggle, and that's just because I need to capitalize these letters, because our class is user API, and we want to make sure this matches. So let's talk about this file real quick. I'm going to import 3 interfaces in one class file from Express. And the first of the interfaces is going to be request. So request is going to be what's going to be pouring into our API. So we're going to be sending HTTP requests from some website somewhere to this backend API layer. And when we do that, we're going to be working with these request objects. So in this case, I just go req, so rec, and I'll be accessing data on the rec's body whenever I'm working with posts, where I'll be doing rec.body, and then whatever attribute it is that I want to work with, or whatever data it is that I'm trying to call. Afterwards, we're going to want to send back a response from our server. So once we're done processing whatever data it is that we're getting back from our database, or whatever it is that we're doing on our back-end server, we're going to have to send a response back to our front end to let it know that that data has been processed and to give it whatever information it was looking for. So we do this using this response object. And in this case, we just call it res. And you can do status codes, you can send error messages, you can do all kinds of fun stuff with this. We'll take a look at some of those functions and features in a little bit. And then finally, we're going to call in the next function. So the next function is a callback argument to the middleware function, and we just call it next by convention. But really all this is just a callback. And if you want to know a little more about it, you can go to expressjs.com/en/guide/writing-middleware.html. There is a whole section there that talks about what each one of these arguments does inside of Express and how they work. And then finally, we're going to be calling the router class. So if you remember, whenever we created our server and we were setting up the basic routing and getting that information installed onto the server, what we had done was we had called express.router as a function, and or the router method on Express library. And we passed that to a router variable, and we didn't really do a whole lot with it other than add some cores and then just kind of tack it onto our server. Here we're going to be building some information on that router so that there's a little more to it, that when we tack that information to our server and we make our server aware that the router actually has endpoints that are affiliated with it. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to export a class file that we're going to call user API, and then we're going to create a public static method called create. And in this, we're going to pass our router class object as the argument for it. And this just gives us access to the Express router and all the fun syntactical sugars that come with Express. So we can work with our RESTful API calls like get, post, put, delete. And we just call this router object .get, .put, .post, whatever it is. And then we pass in 2 input arguments. So the first input argument is just a string. And that string defines what our endpoint should look like. The base URL is already tacked onto it. So in this case, I can just do /API/user. And all this does is it just says http://localhost:8080/API/user. And that's more or less what we're getting. We just get to shorthand it right here. The second argument is an arrow function, and this is going to take our request, our response, and our next function. Here's where we're going to start passing some things around. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new instance of our router class, and we're going to call a private method on the router class itself, and we're going to call this test route. We're going to give test route the request, the response, and the next function. So when we generate, or when we hit this route, what we do is we actually create an instance of our own API, and we're hitting this one particular method on that instance. Here you can see I have my private function, and I pass to it the input arguments of request, response, and next. And what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to send back a response from my server. So all I do is I just call my res, and I invoke the send method on res, and I just send some text. So all I did was I just sent, this is some text. And now I call my callback function, and I return from the function itself. Pretty simple route. There's nothing too insane here. But now I need to make my server aware that this route exists. So let's go to the server TS file. We're going to head down to line 69. And now we should just be able to go user API dot create. And then I just pass in my router. And I'm done. It's just that simple. Our server is now aware that this set of endpoints exists on our router, and it's very easily added in or taken out. So as things deprecate on your API, or you want to add new features to your API, it gets really easy whenever you start working with some of these OOP features. And if you're not familiar with the factory method, factory pattern, all we're doing is we're just kind of creating all of our instances and anything that we're going to need at the time of instantiation. So we call this create method, and what we're doing is we're more or less invoking and creating all these different routes that are available on our class object. Cool. So let's go ahead and get this guy running. So come down to your terminal window and type the word gulp. And what this is going to do is this is going to invoke that pipeline that we created inside of Gulp, where we delete a bunch of stuff from our distribution folder. We're going to copy a bunch of files over, and then what we're going to do is transpile those files into Java, or from TypeScript to JavaScript. So if I was to go to my dist folder now, I can see inside of here I got this bin with the www file. I have all of my server, and everything's been converted to these JavaScript files for me. So super cool, right? And now to launch the server, we can just do npm start. Great. Oops, looks like we failed. What did we fail for? On first connect. Oops. I know exactly what's wrong here. So I'm going to control C and say yes. And what I need to do is type db startup.bat. What I screwed up on was I forgot to boot up my database. So I tried to start a server with no database to connect to. So now I can do npm start in another window. And as we see, this flashing cursor indicates that I am now ready. So this is a good time where you're going to want to open up your Postman. I already have a copy open. And I'm going to run a test call to my API. So I can go ahead and pick my call, and I can say that this is a get. And I just enter the URL. So here I'm making a call to localhost :8080/API/user. And when I hit send, you can see that I get back, this is some text. So our server is now working, and we're able to make calls to our API, but none of this is really doing anything interesting for us. So let's go ahead and add some code that will be useful. So let's head back over to our user API, and we're just going to select all and just overwrite this. Add another curly brace here. I got to capitalize this P and this I, and we should be good to go. All right, so what am I doing? Well, this line is nothing new, but we see that I'm pulling in my user model. Now, if you remember right, working with a user model can work in two different ways. If I was to work with this variable directly, or this item directly that I export, this user constant that I created, I'm technically working with a collection inside of MongoDB. But if I ask for an instance of user, I am working with a document inside of the user collection. It's going to be very important in a few more lines, because we're going to be working with this as a document rather than a collection. And you're going to see that I'm using the keyword new to indicate that I'm working with the document. Next, we're going to import the observable interface from RxJS. And this is pretty standard. And then we're also going to pull in this from promise observable. So the thing about RxJS is it's a really big library. There's a lot of operators in there, and there's a lot of really cool functions that you can use. But Calling in RxJS, just like this import statement, is the equivalence of doing something like, import and then, my Java dot star. Don't do this. This is kind of like one of those things that they teach you not to do whenever you're a Java programmer. As a JavaScript programmer, this is the equivalence of doing that as a Java programmer. Don't do this. This is a really heavy package. There's a lot of imports. You don't want to pull this in more places than you have to. So only pull in what you need. So we're going to do rxjs/add, and everything is pretty much located in this add folder. And there's two folders you may mainly be working with in here. It's going to be operator and observable. So from promise, what we're going to do is be creating an observable from a promise. So we're going to want to work with observables. And now we're just going to look for this from promise operator, and that pulls in only the one small chunk of code that we're going to need. So this makes things very lightweight and super fast. Now let's head on down, and we see nothing new here. This user API is exactly the same. We still create the same static control method, or static create method. And then we are going to just kind of rename the method. Instead of being test function or whatever it was that I called it, we're going to call it create new user. And we're going to pass it the request, response, and next arguments. And then down here for the create new user, you see that I have some code. So there's a good bit of code here, and let's start stepping through this. So remember how I was just talking about our user model and that I was going to be using this keyword new to create an instance of that model or a document? So this is exactly what I was talking about. I'm going to declare a constant that, notice how I use this lowercase u to denote that I'm working with a document. Some may want to be more specific and do something like user doc. It's up to you. I pretty much work almost exclusively on my own, so I don't have to worry too much about this. This convention makes a lot of sense for me. But I'm going to create an instance of my user, and in the constructor, I'm going to pass an object. And that object is going to be all of the different pieces that I defined on the user schema earlier. So if I go into my schemas folder, and I take a quick look at user, now I have this email, password, customer, first name, etc. And I want to populate this from my request body. So I have my email, my password, my customers array. So request.body.email, request.body.password. So remember how I said earlier, we're going to be pulling information off the body, and we just do request.body.attribute. Well, here's the attribute names. It's just email and password. And customer is, we're not going to have anything when we initially create a user, so we could just give it a blank array and just hard code this value. Now, some of you are probably screaming at your monitor because you noticed I left a couple of things off here. But the created at, remember, is timestamped. And the user ID is completely optional, and Mongo creates that for us. But I'm going to leave first name off, even though it's a required field, because I'm going to show you how validation works with Mongoose. Next, I'm going to declare a variable called error, and I forgot to type this, so I'm going to type it as a string because we're using TypeScript here. And the whole value of having TypeScript is strong data typing, right? And we've seen a lot of people probably in the past who have created these JavaScript servers, and they're a nightmare to work with because you really don't know what the data types are. So don't really leave anything up to being a guessing game. Always strongly type any kinds of variables that you're creating. So now that we have our error message, let's start doing some error checking. So the first two fields I want to take a look at is our request body email and our request body password. And for simplicity's sake, it's always better to customize your own error messages and to have them come back from Mongoose, because if you do, they're probably going to be a little confusing to your front-end developer. And they'll make perfect sense to you, but your front-end developer is most likely to be scratching their head trying to figure out what this stuff is. So send them back some kind of custom error message that's going to make more sense for them. In my case, I did the email or password fields, and I just truthy checked them to see if they exist. And then afterwards, I truthy checked them in different combinations to tell which ones are missing. So here I have the no email, no password case. I have the no email case. And then finally, as a default case, I just say, well, if it's past the other ones, then obviously the password is the only thing that can possibly be left that wasn't populated. Next, I'm going to call or send a response back from my server. So I want to call the res argument that I passed in, which is just a response object. I'm going to invoke the status method, which takes an input argument of an integer. And this is where you input your server codes. So for us, we're going to do a 400 for a malformed request, and then we're going to chain the JSON method on top of it. And in here, it just takes an object as the input argument, and we're going to send the title, and we're going to call it malformed request, and then the error message itself that we wound up with. I did forget to do something here, so I'm going to call next to get our callback function, and then return. We don't really need to execute any of this other code if we have an error. Once we have the error sent out, we really don't care about the rest of the code. So this is a good place to return out of the function. Then we're going to do a console log statement. This is just more for like debugging purposes for myself so that I can see things kind of happening in the browser, or sorry, in my IDE as I'm running requests in my side monitor. And this just tells me that we're going to start kicking off a save. Now, as a standard naming convention, I have this observ, and observable is actually denoted with a $sign. So I'm just going to go ahead and change these real quick and just run these to standard conventions. So all this does is indicates that this is a type of observable, and I think if I call the observable interface, it's probably going to get mad at me. And I notice that this is probably mad because it's probably looking for, there we go. It's looking for a data type. So now we have our model on this guy, and we'll just say that this passes back user model object. Actually, you know, this probably isn't a user model object. We should say this passes back user interface. Is that correct? Maybe we could do that. We'll find out. Okay. I have a feeling this might blow up because of the two objects, and we'll find out if I'm using the correct data type here. But I could be wrong. I've been proven wrong before in the past. And it should be good. So what's going on here? Well, first I'm calling an observable, and I'm saying that I want to generate my observable from a promise. And I'm going to work with my document, and remember whenever I declared my document model that I had this document interface that I added, and this allows me to work with standard functions inside of Mongoose and treat my user model as both a document with the user interface attributes attached to it. So here, if I control click on save, I see that this passes back the promise that I'm expecting. And this is how I'm going to convert everything over to an observable. Now, if you're working with a query, say that you want to work with the collection itself, and you do find by ID and remove, right? So this is a query, and this is going to return back a document query. If you try to convert this to an observable, you'd have a serious problem on your hands, because the RxJS library is not going to know how to handle this, and basically it's going to chuck you a really cryptic error. So to get around this problem, if you ever need to convert a query to a promise, what you do is once you're done calling whatever query it is that you want to do, you do .exec. This will now try to execute the query, but it's going to return it as a promise. So if I ever wanted to do this, now I can, wrapper it in this from promise method, and I wouldn't have a problem converting this to an observable. Just keep that in mind if you ever have to work with a query. So now that I have my observable saved, in order to activate it, I need to subscribe to it. So I'm going to go ahead and run the subscription call, and I have the 3 different functions that it takes as its arguments. The first is next, and next is just going to be the response from our database. So whenever some data is emitted at the subscriber level, next is going to trigger. And this is going to happen for each individual item that gets flowed through our data pipeline. I don't have any map operators or anything on this, So there's not like there's anything crazy, and I should only ever expect that coming from the database, I should only get one piece of information at a time. So I'm not expecting this next function to trigger multiple times. I can pretty much count that it will only trigger once, and that's good enough. Whenever I get that, I'm going to send back a response, and I'm going to give it a status code of 200, and I'm going to tell it to send the user object. For an error, I'm going to pretty much do the same thing that I did. Instead of sending 404, because this is a not found error, I'm going to call this malformed DB request. There we go. And again, I just attach my JSON object. I give it an object as its input argument, and here I just give it a title in the error message itself. Then finally I get the onComplete. And this runs at the very end whenever our subscriber is finished processing all of the data that's being pipelined in. It will trigger this onComplete function. So here's a good place to run next, or our callback function, and hit return. So with all of that being done, I think we're good to go. We should be able to now run gulp, compile our code. And by the way, our code is going to blow up when we run our server, and that's okay because I'm going to show you that Mongoose is doing the validation checks as we expect. So we're going to go ahead and head back into Postman. I'm going to run a post call, and I want to form a body on this thing. So I'm going to have an email, a password, and a first name. And I'm going to give it brit@gmail.com. I'm going to give it the super secure password of 123, and then I'm also going to give it the first name of Brit. I expect this to not go well. So let's go ahead and hit send. Exactly. So here I got the malformed DB request. So this means that we made it through all of our validation checks for users' email and password, but we failed on something that the database was expecting. So I purposely left this out so that we could actually see this. These errors are a little cryptic, and you're going to want to pay attention to how they're formed. So here it says that this error was an error object. The error object was first name. It was the problem. And the message says that path first name is required. And the name of the error was a validator error. So pretty much what we got out of this is check this out, user validation failed. This is a really straightforward error. User validation failed first name. Path first name is required. So if I go back into the code base and I take a quick look back up here, remember how I said that I wasn't going to put in first name? Well, when it tried to package everything up into our schema, and we hit our user schema here, it said, hey, wait a minute, you have first name assigned to true. If you don't give me first name, we're going to have a problem on our hands. And that's exactly what it did. So I'm going to jump into my database here, and I know I'm kind of hopping around, so forgive me for this, but I just want to make sure that everything's been wiped up. Okay, good. And now we're going to run our call one more time. Oops, actually, sorry, I got to recompile my server. I almost forgot about this. So I got to do gulp, and this is going to clean everything up again. And I'm going to do npm start. Now you can do a file watcher on this and automate it so when changes happen to files that you actually run this pipeline through. And I'll probably do this in most likely our next video when we start setting up automation testing for our API. So now let's head back into our post call, and I'm going to hit send. And it looks like something didn't change here. Probably because I didn't add the first name field. Okay, sorry about that. Request body dot first name, and let's throw in a comma. One more time, let's build the project. As you can see, this is the reason why watchers are really nice, because this can get a little annoying to have to sit there and type these commands over and over again. And this time it worked. So now we got a blank customer array. You can see our date.now function triggered, and it assigned a default value to our created app field. We see that MongoDB assigned it a unique ID. that the email field, password, and first name all were saved correctly, and that we have this double underscore V field, which I've never actually needed to use. So if you find a purpose for this, let me know, because I'd like to know if I could ever use that for something. I'll take a look at the document some other time and see if there's a reason why we can use that. Great, so let's take a quick look at the database, make sure that everything looks good. Oops, that is my Slack. Sorry about that. Let me minimize my Slack channel. And yeah, everything was good. We have our timestamp. We have our blank customer array. We have our object ID, brit@gmail.com, 123, and Brit. So we're looking good. It looks like everything is exactly the way we wanted it to be. So what happens whenever you want to add some new API endpoints? And I'm going to show you how easy this is. So if I wanted to add, say, a get call, so we just do router.get, and then we throw in our :/API/user, and then we do our function. Go ahead, and there we go. And make sure that we have the right verb there. And now we just do... Oh, and by the way, if you're ever using private methods, you should really put an underscore in front of these. It's just one of those conventions. It's kind of like the $sign at the end of an observable. And then let's do new method. We're going to copy this, and let's go ahead and make a little code. So back up here, let's grab our input arguments, dump these in, let's throw in the private keyword in front, drop here, and then let's do res.send. We'll just send some text. This is the get route. Hit our next function, and then our return. Cool. Reload our server. And this is how easy it is to add new endpoints to your cluster. And now we have this, and if I went in and I take a get, this is the get route. So look how simple that was. I didn't have to do anything to my server TS file. It was all completely in line. So now if I ever want to do like other APIs or anything like that, it's as simple as just kind of making this one-time factory call and then modifying whatever it is on our API layer. So this kind of abstracts away like weirdness with if I want to change out a method, let's say that I need a whole new implementation, or even for that matter, let's say I want to revision my API. Say I'm going to run into something where like I have an old API that I need to support, but I want to release a new API. So I can do an optional argument, which is just :v2, and then it's as simple as doing this. I can say if, and I can say rec.params.v2. We would go to new user API _v2 new method, right? And I pass in all my normal arguments, and I can just say that else, and finally we just encapsulate this thing, and there you go. Now you're supporting two different APIs on this one call, and that's how simple it is. Additionally, if I wanted to remove a route, I could just delete it and wipe it out like this, and bam, I don't have to do anything to my server. So this level of abstraction gives you a lot of flexibility and freedom for being able to change your code down the line. So I hope you all liked this video. Just remember to like and subscribe to the channel below. If you have anything that you would like us to cover, or any suggestions that you would like to give us, remember to put them in the comments below. I do get back to those. And if you'd like us to work on a project, feel free to reach out to us at www.novacodellc.com. Hit the Hire Us link in the upper right-hand corner, fill out the forms. We'd be happy to get right back to you as soon as possible. And until next time, I'll see you all very soon.